My name is Ross McInroy. I was born in Wasioja, Minnesota, which is a community about 25 miles northwest of Rochester, Minnesota. And
And what was your birthday?
July 24th, 1935.
So can you tell me some about your background? Like, what did your parents do, or how many siblings did you have?
Okay, my father was a heavy-duty construction. He worked on roads, dams, bridges, and for the first 5 years of my life, I don't remember too much of it. We stayed pretty much local. In about 1940, Dad bought a new trailer, which was a 28-foot, they call them travel trailers now. And he ended up, prior to the start of the war, with a new DeSoto to pull it with, and we started traveling around the United States. We my dad worked in Iowa, Arkansas, Wisconsin, Minnesota, all over the state, North Dakota, South Dakota, and we ended up in 1943 in Hanford, Washington. We stayed there until early December, January of 44, 45, when this was a trailer town. The whole town was nothing but trailers. I would guesstimate 2,000 trailers. And one morning we woke up to postings saying, "Leave immediately, your life is in danger." I didn't realize till several years later that's where they made the first atomic bomb. And so the place was completely vacant. Within a couple days, we ended up down in Merced, California, starting I was in the 4th grade. Stayed down there until 1951. In between time, my parents were divorced. So I came back to Rochester here to live with my dad for 1 year. Went through my junior year of high school. After my junior year of high school, I went back to Merced to live with my mother, at which time I turned 17 and joined the Air Force on my 17th birthday.
So did you enlist?
Yep.
And why did you choose the Air Force?
I really don't know. I wanted to be a radio operator on an airplane. High hopes. And of course the recruiter says, "Sign here, Sonny." So I did. And my mother had to sign for them to take me. So I went in. I was 17-year-old kid, very wet behind the ears, and went to basic training in Parks, California, which was a base that they reactivated after World War II in order to get more people into the Air Force through basic training. I had a shortened basic. They went down to 8 weeks, where I think normally it was 10 weeks. And after basic, or while in basic, we were tested, and they asked what we wanted, career field we want to go in. And I said, I want to be a radio operator on an airplane. They said, sure. Well, lo and behold, assignments came out, and I was sent down to Keesler, Mississippi to go to radio operator school. 6, 7 months later, I learned the Morse code and everything, and lo and behold, I graduated and was assigned to Ellsworth Air Force Base, South Dakota, as a radio operator on RB-36s. The only difference between the RB and the B was that we did reconnaissance work, gathering information. And I spent the next 3 years flying all over the United States, pretty much all over the world, in B-36s or RB-36s. Never over Korea, though. We did fly around Korea to go to Bangkok, Thailand, in 1955, when things were pretty quiet in Korea. But that's about it.
So can you tell me again, what was the date that you enlisted?
July 28th was the day I actually raised my hand, in 1952. And they made me wait the weekend because, I don't know, they hadn't completed the physical or something. So actually, I was 4 days after my 17th birthday. And so then I got out exactly 4 years later, which was July 27th, which was 1 year to the day I was in the service when they signed the Korean armistice, which is July 27th, 1953. So I was in exactly 1 year.
When you were first enlisting, there was a war already going on.
Yes.
Did you consider the fact that you might get sent?
Yeah, I did. And it really made little difference to me. I did have the opportunity, as I was finishing up basic radio school, they sent a guy from the Army in to talk to us and says, we need forward observers in Korea. And these forward observers needed to know code, Morse code. And we had that. So it says, any volunteers will get you transferred over to the Army. And I think we only had to spend 3 years. Well, they probably had an audience of, I don't know, a couple hundred. No hands went up because they also said that this forward observer job in the Army was one of the shortest. Your life expectancy was as short. And so anyway, no hands went up. So I did have the opportunity to go to Korea, but I stayed instead at Rapid City, South Dakota, and got to watch every time we took off, we saw Mount Rushmore almost every time. It was kind of neat.
So can you tell me more about the airplane itself that you worked on?
Yeah, the B-36 was the largest, how can I put this, largest production bomber ever built. It had 10 engines on it, 6 reciprocating engines, and they were what they called pushers. They were on the trailing edge of the wings. Plus we had 4 jets, so we had a total of 10 engines on the plane. I was on a RB-36 versus a B-36. The main difference being the B-36 had 3 bomb bays, each one of them capable of carrying tons of bombs, or in the nuclear age, it could carry 3 nuclear weapons. Our plane only had 2 bomb bays, the third space being taken up by a camera or a photo compartment where they did the photo reconnaissance, so we could only carry 2 big bombs. And we, at super long range, I think the advertised range was 10,000 miles. I personally spent almost 32 hours was my longest flight, and that was from Travis, California to Guam in Mariana Islands. And we were on our way over there to occupy the base for 4 months. There was no, during World War II, they found that they didn't have any planes or bases in that area. So what they did was during the war, when they took over Guam, I don't know, but that was our outpost, and we rotated. Each wing would spend 4 months over there. So we always had a full wing that could cover that part of the world. And 10,000 miles, along with the, well, we didn't have any in Alaska, but anyway, with the planes stationed in the United States, we could reach virtually any place in the world.
What does a whole wing mean?
Oh, wing? In our case, we had 3 squadrons in the wing, and I believe that each squadron had about 10 or 11 planes and crews, so approximately 35 crews that man these 30 aircraft. So we could, we didn't stay in the air like they did with B-52s after us, but somebody was always on alert, and we could get in the air probably in 2 hours' time. But it used a lot of fuel. I'm trying to think. I think the plane, the fuselage on it was 185 feet, and the wingspan was over 200, like 250 feet. So it was just one big, huge plane. they were dependable because we had so many engines, and you could fly normally without one engine, and at a reduced capability with two engines being out. One time while cruising over eastern South Dakota, by the time we got back to Ellsworth, we had 5 engines out. So there aren't many people that can say they landed with 5 engines out. There aren't many planes that have 5 engines. But it was a big plane. Our altitude flights, we go to 40,000 feet. The normal cruise speed, I think, was about 300 miles an hour. Not terribly fast, but just go for a long ways.
So, can you tell me the story? You said you came back with just 5 engines. Can you tell me that story?
Well, yeah, we were started, and we were at altitude for some reason, and we started losing the reciprocating engines. Well, when at altitude our jets are on already, so apparently we're trying to go to altitude and we lost one engine and then another engine, so they started cranking up the jets to get us up, and we lost one jet on startup. I forget what they call it, flame out or something. And then we lost another one. But anyway, we just kept on losing them. So when we landed in back at Ellsworth, we were 5 engines out, and we come around, and the whole airport or the runway had all the emergency vehicles on this. Wow, this is going to be fun. And the radio compartment is up in the nose of the aircraft, right behind the pilots, the engineers, and the navigators. And that was the landing position for everybody except the ones that had to be in the seats. And as we were approaching, they didn't make us go round and round or anything. And as we were approaching, I was sitting there next to this navigator, and I had my flight jacket on my lap, we were sitting on the floor. And pretty soon he started nervously looking around, and he says, "Are you going to use that flight jacket?" "No." "And can I have it?" "Sure." He takes it and wraps it around his head. That's when I figured out things were a little more serious than I thought. But anyway, the landing was perfect and no problems at all. But this navigator had wrapped it around his head was from right here in Rochester. And I kept track of him until about 10 years ago. And he was living down in San Antonio, Texas. And I've been trying to find him ever since, so I don't know where he is. But our plane carried like 20 to 22 people on it. Up forward in the forward compartment we had 2 engineers, 3 pilots, 3 navigators, and the radio operator, me. And I also had normally first radio. I was second radio. And photo compartment, we had a couple photo people. In the rear compartment, there was about 7 enlisted, mostly gunners, and a couple ECM operators that collected, and another officer. So we were balanced about 50-50, half officers, half airmen, air enlisted. And my job, I was a radio operator. I was a defensive ECM operator, which meant that I jammed radars and radios. When the time come that they needed a gunner, I was also a gunner. I had to go to what they call FTD, on-base school for gunnery, so I had to learn that. And I think probably my most important job, since much of the time I was only enlisted in the forward end of the airplane, I was cabin boy. Hey, Mac, need a cup of coffee? Yes, sir. You go running, and it had its advantages. One time the pilot calls on us, hey, Mac, I need a cup of coffee. And I said, yes, sir, and got off the headsets and went and got a cup of coffee, and I met the pilot coming down from the cockpit. And he says, where are you going with that coffee? I said, well, you said you needed some. He says, yeah, I'm going to come down and get a cup of coffee. He says, why don't you take over my seat? I said, sure, I'd love to. So I went up there, and the co-pilot was flying the aircraft. And apparently we had nothing but time and fuel. He says, you want to fly it? I said, well, sure. He said, okay. And he showed me that you push the lever forward, you go back, and you pull it back, you go up, turn left, go right. And he says, and this here is the artificial horizon, which tells you where you are. And so he says, why don't you get this thing level, flat, and we'll fly it for a while. So I thought I was doing a fantastic job keeping it right there. And lo and behold, one of the scanners, the gunners in the back, they call them scanners because they had to continually watch these engines, make sure that they were still running and whatever. So anyway, he said, who the heck is flying this aircraft? And somebody said, why? I said, well, we're all over the dang sky. That's my one and only time as a pilot. I thought I was doing great, but apparently not. But very enjoyable. A tight-knit group. But we at the time, General LeMay, who you probably heard about, was the man in charge of SAC. And if you were one of LeMay's boys, they took good care of you. Our barracks were brand new, 2 men to a room, and a shower for every 2 rooms. This is unheard of. This is right after the times when the guys lived in open bay barracks and everything. So it was nice to be one of amaze boys.
What were your duties specifically? What does a radio man do?
As a radio operator, we had to send position reports once an hour. At a given time, we'd call back and I'd tell them this is aircraft such and such, located at such and such coordinates, and I think sometimes we give them altitudes. And this, my first 2 flights was done in Morse code. After that, they stopped using Morse code. So that's when they stopped using radio operators on airplanes, because the pilot or navigator, whoever, can do the same thing. So anyway, so I did that. The main thing was we'd go on these max effort missions, which were to simulate dropping a big bomb. And when we did that, the radio operator would have to communicate back to the base, and it's what they call a strike report. And at the time, they also gave their evaluation of how they think the drop in accuracy of the bomb was. And when we got back, we were graded with this. And also, the radio operator was graded by how far away you could send your message. Well, one of my first strike reports, a station by the name of City Slamaine wanted my traffic, and I told the pilot that this place called City Slamaine wanted my traffic, and he says, make him authenticate. We had our little code books, and the guy authenticated, so I said, okay, here it comes. Got back down, I found out that City Slamaine was in North Africa. It was just a freak bounce of the radio signals that got him there. But, and since that radio operator was probably 1/3 of my job, another third, I was an ECM operator, and I would jam radar sites. And we had actual radar sites, and we had simulators, and we were graded on that once again. I was a gunner. When we fired our guns, we fired for proficiency. They didn't trust us to shoot at anything. So if you went up with 1,200 rounds of ammunition in your gun, and you fired them all 1,200, and no misfires, hangs up, or whatever, then you would have a perfect score of 100. And we had 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We had 8 turrets on this thing. So the airplane was completely surrounded. So anyway, they would go out and they give you overall rating of how the entire airplane. Geez, I don't even know how many. 1,200 times 8, 20,000 rounds of ammunition. That's a lot. And these were 20 millimeter shells, about that big, and well, much bigger around than my thumb. So quite a big aircraft with a lot of armament and a lot of capabilities.
In the early 1950s, when the war was going on, how much did you know about Korea, or what was kind of in the news? What was the general American awareness?
Well, you know, I knew about Korea. I knew there was a chance that I'd go over there. And I knew that it was a nasty war. I knew several people that were World War II vets that got recalled for Korea. But, gee, I don't know. Yeah, we just knew it was and we had heard so much about the weather over there, how bad it was, and it's someplace I didn't really want to go, and I guess I didn't know much about the plight of the Korean people. I find out now, since I've joined this organization, how bad it really was. So I didn't realize it at the time.
What kind of, how was the news covering it, the war?
Well, I'm thinking this was just about the time that TV was coming around. World War II, we used to get the news when you went to the movies once a week and big screen. Here, I think that it was normally, I think, front page or on the local newspapers. But that's about where you got it from, the newspapers, because unless you sat around and listened to the radio, and very few people did that. I personally, I was a young high school student, and when I was getting ready for school, when I lived here in Rochester, I'd turn on a city radio station, listen to them, and they would always talk about it. But that's it. Really, as I say, I found so much more about it in later years than I knew initially.
And what is your involvement with the local chapter?
I shied away from it for years because I was never in Korea. I actually only joined about 8 months ago, when they said, "Hey, look, you're part of the war effort. Go ahead and join us." You were doing your thing, but in a different way. And so anyway, when I got in, I think the thing that I enjoy most is the interaction with older people my age. And you have something to talk about. And not many of them come out and tell you what they did over there. It's just like you kind of have to drag it out of them. So, but you get them talking, and like in interviews like this, I'm sure they come out with everything. But I just had a round table discussion the other night. Two of the guys that I see every week, I had no idea what they had gone through, which was being shot up and almost drowned, Wow. it wasn't good. My days in B-36, they were different completely, but I was never shot at or, had to stay afloat for 10 hours or whatever. But I'm impressed with the other members more so. I don't know, there's a couple hundred members, but of the ones that show up every week, there's like only 4 Air Force, few more Navy, but the vast majority of the members are Army and Marines.
Where were you when the war ended?
When you get assigned to a crew of B-36, you have all these various training. You have to go through altitude training. Well, one of the trainings I had to go through was SAC Survival School, where it's stationed, or it was at Stead Air Force Base, Nevada. You went through training, more or less what to do if you were ever captured and all this kind of stuff. And then they send you up in the high Sierras for a 10-day trek. Very little food. They gave us pills to put in our water. I, as a radio operator, had a 60-pound radio, and it was split up in 2 packages, one a generator and one the radio. And I didn't have to carry it all the time, but they split it up amongst the 20 people. And so anyway, I was in the middle of this 10-day trek, and at the end of it, a couple of the guys, they give you a little piece of fishing line and a hook. We had camped out waiting for the pickup from this survival training, and 2 of the guys went down to this little stream and tried to catch some fish. As I said, we didn't have much to eat for 10 days. Well, these guys ran into 2 women that were fishing. This is up in the high Sierras, north of Truckee, if you're familiar with that area. And at this time, these women told the 2 airmen that the war was over. So I was up at the high Sierras. We didn't find out about it till 3 days later. So the war was over the 27th of July, and it must have been about 30th before we found out about it. Of course, pretty happy.
Did you know anybody? Did you have any friends who were over there?
Oh, yeah. Well, especially now, these new guys, most of them were. But back then, no. I was so young when I joined, and the people that would have gone over there, by the time they got to be the normal joining age, the war was over. So, no, I knew very few people over there. I did complete my 20 years in the Air Force. I went back in after 5 years of being out. So I went back in, and those last 16 years, I met a lot of people that were over there at that time. I spent my last 16 years as a ACNW radar repairman, which are these little tiny radar sites that were marked all across the northern United States. Well, I was stationed at many of them up northern Minnesota, up at Finland. In fact, that's where I retired from. Spent a lot of time in Alaska and quite a bit of time down in Mississippi. I was an instructor down there for a few years. But my most memorable time of those 20 years was my B-36 days during the Korean War.
So you were in the Air Force for a total of 20 years?
Yeah.
Wow.
So, yeah, I retired as an E7, which is Master Sergeant, which is about normal. If I would have kept my nose clean, I could have probably retired as a E8. E9s, they now require you to, I'm not sure they need a full degree or not, but most I was able to pick up in the Air Force was an associate's degree, so, but it helped.